We are on Tes Vav Amud Aleph 15a, about 2/3 down. Yosef ben Ye'ezer is straight of Yosef ben Yochanan ish Yerushalayim gazutum al eretz ha'amim al kli zachuchim. We saw in the list of enactments that the Gemara had brought in order to prove that Hillel and Shammai themselves had enacted that it had enacted the Tumah for Yadayim, for hands. So the Gemara had a list of enactments that were made by the various generations of Chachamim, and they listed Yosef ben Ye'ezer ish Tzreida and Yosef ben Yochanan ish Yerushalayim, who were the first of the zugos, of the pairs that led the community after the Nevi'im and the Anshe Knesset Agdola. They enacted Tumah on the land outside of Eretz Yisrael and on glass. So Gemara says, how can you tell me that this was enacted by the Yosef ben Ye'ezer Sreida and Yosef ben Yochanan Yerushalayim, which were pretty early on in this time of the second Beis HaMikdash, but this was only enacted much later, towards the end of the Beis HaMikdash, when the last 80 years, which are called the Chachamim of the Shmonim Shana, the Rabbanon of the 80 years. Damar of Kahana. So Kahana said what the actual timeline was for the Chachamim towards the end of the Beis HaMikdash. And he learned this because Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi, when Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi got ill, and the Chachamim sent him a message. They said, Amar lanu, Rabbeinu, our teacher, Amar lanu beza gimel dvarim she'amarta lanu mishum avicha. Tell us 2 of the 3 things that you told us in the name of your father, Rabbi Yossi, and that we can continue learning. And remember that teaching. Shalach lehem, so he sent them kacha ma'aba. And this is a timeline my father taught us. Kuf pei shana shalachara beis abayis. 180 years prior to the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. Pashta machas Arushal Yisrael. The Roman evil empire took over Am Yisrael. Pei shana shalachara bayis, 80 years prior to the destruction, meaning 100 years into the Roman rule. Gazru Tuma al Eretz Ha'amim. The Chachamim enacted a Tuma on the land of outside Eretz Yisrael, of the other nations. Val Kli Zechuchis, and on glass. Mem Shana Shalachar V'Bayis. 40 years later, 40 years before the destruction, Gol Sala Sanhedrin Yashala B'Chanus. The Sanhedrin left the Lishkas HaGazis. They left the chamber where they would sit in the Beis HaMikdash and moved off onto the Temple Mount into place Chanus. And the reason for that was because the murder was rampant, and they didn't want to have to adjudicate cases that would pertain to that. And so first the Gemara says because they did not adjudicate penalties, fines, punitive fines, but rather they stuck to actual monetary law. Really, they didn't want to do any punitive action. Because they did not want to do capital cases. So that's the end of the brayso of the statement of Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi. So in the name of Rabbi Yossi. So the question is, 80 years prior to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, was the enactment of Eretz Ha'amim and glass that they're susceptible to Tumah, and you're telling me that it was Yosef ben Ye'ezer and Yosef straight up. So the Gemara says, if you can tell me, well, they too were in that period of 80 years prior to the destruction of Beis HaMikdash, that can't be. Tani, we learned the last 100 years of the Beis HaMikdash were the rulers of Kollel Yisrael were this: Hillel, Shimon, Shimon, the son of Hillel, Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Shimon.
Is there any significance? I forget where we saw that. Did we see this, or did I see it somewhere? But that Herod only finished the thing, like, I think it was around that time that Herod finished his renovations of the Beis Hamikdash.
Around which time?
Around 80 years before the Churban. There wasn't much more. I don't remember where I saw it.
I don't know how it would relate to this.
Well, I was just wondering, is there any connection?
Not that I can think of or know of. Yeah. This I don't think any of this pertains to.
I think it was 13 BCE. I think Herod finished.
That would be more than 80 years prior to this the destruction. No.
It's about 85. I'm just wondering. Just anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know what it would be. So in any case, so we have a list of who are the leaders of the community for the last 100 years. Hillel and Shimon, his son, which was Rabbi Shimon, and Gamliel, his son, which was Rabbi Gamliel the elder, and Shimon, which is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, which was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who was killed by the Romans. So those were the four leaders over 100 years. The last 100 years of the Beis Hamikdash, they were the leaders. They were many generations before Hillel. If you look at the list of the Zugos, you will find, and you find them in Avos, you can find them in the Mishnah Chagiga and elsewhere. You have the list of the Zugos, you'll find that Yosef ben Yezer and Yosef ben Yochanan were many generations prior to Hillel. And Hillel began his leadership 100 years before the end of the Beis Hamikdash. So there's no way that Yosef ben Yezer was at the time of the enactment of the land and glass, Tuman outside lands and the glass. So what's the meaning of our brisa that said that they were the ones that enacted it? Ella, so now we're on 15b, Tesvav Amid Beis. Ella, Asa Inu Gaza Gusha Lisraf. So Va'avira V'Leiklum. So if you remember, yesterday we talked about that there are two levels of Tuma for Teruma. We have a level of Tuma for Teruma that requires burning the Teruma because it is now Tameh, and Teruma to man requires to be burned. Then we have Taliyah. Taliyah is where it's in a state of limbo. It's not worthy of burning because it is not fully Tameh. However, it is not edible anymore, and so it's in Taliyah. It's hanging. It's in limbo. So the lands in Chutz La'aretz are not Tameh in the sense of proper Tumah. They do have a Tumah enacted on it, and you do have certain possibilities of encountering Tumah on account of that there are burial places of the deceased that they would not mark. They didn't care. There were mass graves. They didn't care putting etzion, a demarcation of where the deceased were lying, and therefore there is a chance that there is tumah there. So the Chachamim enacted that at first. The Gemara is trying at this point to figure out what the distinction would be, and so the Gemara says, well, perhaps at first the enactment of Yosef ben Yezer and Yosef ben Yochanan, the Zugos, they enacted that gusha, the clay, the earth, the soil of foreign lands, which could have tuma in there, is if teruma touches that, it's required to be burned. However, avira, but on the airspace, v'lo klum, there was no enactment at all. V'asar Rabbana and the Peishana, and then the Chachamim of the 80 years came, gozar avira litlis. They enacted not only if it touches the clay, it touches the ground, but even if it comes into the airspace, so it's being carried in a box. The teruma is being carried in a box, but the box is not sealed completely at the bottom, and therefore there's space for the airspace to go in. So it's directly above the ground. It'll also create a tumah. So that's the enactment. So the Gemara says, Tosfos already points out, the Gemara seems to ignore the question of the glass. The Gemara is only answering the question of, did the later Chachamim enact the Tumah on a foreign land, or the earlier Chachamim? But they do not address the question of glass. Tosfos has multiple answers. The second answer is that the text over here is different. That's a point I wanted to make, that the Tosfos has a text like we had in the previous statements with Hillel, that Yosef and Yezer were the ones to make the original enactment, but it did not spread. It was not accepted by the people. And as such, the enactment never took hold until later. The Chachamim of 80 years made it again, and then it was accepted, and that took hold. So there's a different text here, but the text we have says that the Chachamim they enacted different levels of Tumah, and that would only be in regards to the land, but not in regards to the glass. And so we still have the outstanding question: who enacted the Tumah on glass? We'll see more about that. So the Chachamim then say, L'meimer the Choleg Gezer Ta'ava. What you're saying is that there was one enactment on the soil, the ground of outside of Eretz Yisrael, and that it would burn the teruma. Amar Ilfa, but that doesn't fit with the teaching of Ilfa, because Ilfa says Yedayim Tchilas Gezeiras L'Sreifa. For the tumah of hands that were enacted, that was from the start enacted as a tumah for burning teruma. Yudaimu the Tchilas Gezeiras L'Sreifa. It's on the enactment of hands that we said that teruma gets burned immediately. It's a solid tumah. But the enactments of the other enactments, such as on the soil of Chutz La'aretz, outside of Eretz Yisrael, there we're going to say that it was not originally enacted to be the teruma gets burned. It was enacted at the level of Taliyah in limbo. You can't eat the teruma anymore, but it's not enough to burn it. Ella, so rather, also inu gozer agusha. The Chachamim at first only enacted that on the soil of outside of Eretz Yisrael, litlos, that we're going to put it in limbo. You can't eat the teruma, but you don't need to burn it. No, you may not burn it, obviously, if you're not supposed to burn it, you're not allowed to because you're wasting teruma. But they didn't enact anything on airspace. And then the Chachamim of 80 years, they enacted Gazer Agusha Lisra, if they upgraded the tumah of the soil to a higher level, that it also includes, that it takes it to the level that you now need to burn the teruma. Avira, and then they changed the airspace and said that which was never enacted upon, we're going to enact litlos, that if it comes into airspace and it's not completely sealed, it's going to be litlos. Now in limbo, you can't eat the teruma, but you don't have to burn it. Well, great. So that makes sense. There's a distinction between the levels of tumah that were enacted at first by Yosef ben Yezer and Yosef ben Yochanan, and then later the Chacham of the 80 years of Shemona Shana, they enacted a higher level of tumah for the soil and also the initial level of tumah for the airspace. So, but that's not true. That doesn't fit either, because we have another brisa. Bakati b'usha gazer. And as we learned in Sanhedrin and elsewhere, that the Chachamim moved, a part of the Sanhedrin's moves, one of them is that they moved to Usha. And in Usha, they enacted certain things, the Beis Din in Usha enacted certain things. And here's a list of enactments. The Tanan we learned, and there's a Mishnah we saw there in Nida, and it's a Mishnah in Taras. The Tanan we learned, Alvav Sveika Surfit Nasatruma. There are 6 levels of tumah for which you would burn teruma. Al Suffolk Beis HaPras. So Beis HaPras is a land that had a grave in there, and somebody plowed the land. And now this piece of land, which had a grave, and now the grave was dug up, the plow went through it. So we can and must assume that some of the bones of the deceased are spread in this field. So we don't know if this person is at any point hovering over the grave, and then there's a tumas ohel, which is the airspace over a tuma of a deceased is going to create tuma. So that's one place. If tuma it went through a Beis HaPras, we have to assume that it may have been over the tuma, and we have to burn. And on land that soil that comes from foreign lands. So somebody brings a potted plant or just a bag of soil for their garden, and the soil says made in China or wherever else outside of the land of Eretz Yisrael. So it requires there's a tumah there. Because again, we're afraid that this comes from a piece of land that had a deceased buried there. There's a kever there, and since they're not so concerned with leaving a kever whole, and they don't demark it, so we're afraid that there may actually be shards of a human in there.
So the earth from Chutz La'aretz. Now, if they made pottery out of that, does that have enough gamina? According to
we're talking about fresh soil. We don't.
Fresh soil.
Yeah. Val Suffolk Big Day Amaretz, Val Suffolk Big Day Amaretz, and clothing of an Amaretz, which we don't know are tummy, but we're afraid that they were used as a cushion to sleep on or sit on, and therefore by a tummy, and therefore maybe they are tummy, and the teruma touched those garments. Also, they're going to need to be burned. Va'al Suffolk Caleb, and this, by the way, that one is based upon the Mishnah Chagiga, which says that all clothing of someone who is not strict with the laws of Tuma are assumed to be a Tamei Midras, a Tuma of somebody having sat on it or slept on it or some sort of pressure on it. That's called Midras. So Valsafik Kalim and Valsafik or any vessels that you find, we have a doubt that maybe they are indeed Tamei, and we don't know what any status. So you have to assume they're Tamei. Valsafik Aroikan, and if you spit, you don't know what that spit is from. It could have come directly from a zav, and we know that the bodily fluids of a zav are Tamei, and therefore we have to, if the teruma touched it, you have to assume that it's tummy. While suffik meraglayim and meragli adam, and if you have a human urine and you don't know who it came from, you have to assume that it may have come from a zav, and therefore if teruma touched it, it's going to be tummy. And shekenegan meragli behema, and this is urine that's next to animal urine. And Rashi says, so it's a double suffix. Number one, I don't even know if it came from a human, because since it's next to animal urine, it may have come from an animal. And even if it came from a human, it could have come from someone that's not a zav. But we have to assume that it came from a zav, even in a double suffix. That's the enactment. Tosas says, no, quite the contrary. The reason why we're a suffix here is if we had just urine alone, we don't know what it is. It could be from an animal. It could be from a human. Even if it's from a human, it could be from someone who's not a zav, and that's a sveka, a double suffix, and there's no reason to make an enactment for that. The reason over here it's enacted is specifically because it's next to animal urine, and we can tell that. So therefore, we say, look, if this is the animal urine, then the one next to it must be the person walking that animal or taking care of the animal, and therefore we have reason to be concerned because we're more sure that this is from a human, and therefore there's only a single suffix. Is this zav or not? But it's for sure from a human. So Rashi and Tosfos disagree on what the basis for the suffix here is. In any case, we have those suffix. So that's for urine. Alvade magan suffix tumasa. And additionally, we have that in a case when the caveat here is that we know for sure it touched, but it's a suffix of whether or not these things are tummy or not. But if we don't know that it touched, then we're not going to say that it needs to be burned. So in all these cases, we know for sure that the teruma touched these substances, and it's just a question of whether or not these substances are a basis for tuma or not. And in all these cases, we say surfin es ha-teruma. The teruma gets burned, and so included in this list of the enactment of Usha is the burning of teruma on account of touching the soil of that came from outside of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yossi, however, just to conclude the brisa, after we notice the question that it says that the Beis Din of Usha was the one enacted the soil of outside Eretz Yisrael to burn it. Rabbi Yossi says, well, it depends. It's not so clear that it has to be that they for sure touched the substance that in doubt. It's tummy or not, or rather, Rabbi Yossi says, even if there's a doubt whether or not that land, that touch ever happened. So we're not sure if it touched the soil from outside Eretz Yisrael. We're not for sure that it touched these vessels or this clothing or the spit or the urine, etc. 1 second, I'll get to your question, Tuvia. So al safik magam b'shusay yachid surfing. Nevertheless, we're going to burn the teruma, and this is on the basis of that that safik tuma b'shusay yachid we're machmer, that whenever there's a doubt of tuma in a private place, then it will machmer because we learn it from Sota. And the Chachamim say, no, we don't burn it on account of that because it's still a suffix, because it is a spek sveka. One, maybe it touched, and even if it touched, maybe it's not tuma. Maybe it didn't touch, and even if it did touch, maybe it's not the source itself is not tummy. So therefore, in a private place, then we're going to put it into limbo. But if it's a public place, it's tar, as we see from Sota that a public place suffix tuma is tar. And yes, Tuvia, the idea of the question of whether it touched or not is going to be a spek sveka, because number one, I'm not even sure it touched, and even if it touched, maybe the source that it touched was not tummy, and therefore there's no reason to burn it. So the Tanakama says it's all talk about that we know for sure it touched. Rabbi Yossi says even if we don't know it touched it, but in a private place we're going to burn it. And the Chachamim say no. If we know it touched, then we go back to the previous enactment of Usha that it will burn. If we don't know that it touched, then in a private place it's tolen, and in a public place it is tahor. And Ula said these 6 doubts, meaning that we don't know if the source that it touched, it came into contact with something, we don't know whether it was tummy or not. These were enacted in Usha. And you just said that the enactment of burning the teruma that touched soil from outside Eretz Yisrael was an enactment of the Chachamim of 80 years. So Gemara says you're right. So we now know we have 3 enactments in regards to land outside of Eretz Yisrael. We have the first enactment from the Zugos, Yosef and Yaz and Yosef and Yochanan. We have the second enactment from the Shmanim Shana, and the third enactment from Usha. So what's going on? Elo asa inu gazer agusha litlos. So the Zugos, Yosef and Yaz and Yosef and Yochanan, they enacted that the soil being touched puts the teruma into limbo. You can't eat it, but you don't burn it. They didn't enact anything in regards to the airspace. And then the Chachamim of the 80 years, they came, Gazer Idividi Litlas. They said, no, we're also including airspace into the enactment. Then the next generation of Usha, the Beis Din in Usha, they came, Gazer Agusha. Right? They enacted that it's a sure tuma in regards to if it touches the clay, the soil that comes from Eretz Yisrael. Again, because there would be graves in there. But they left the airspace, which the Chachamim, the 80 years enacted, and they left that in place as a doubt in limbo. You can't eat it, but you don't burn it. So to conclude, we have 3 enactments in regards to the soil, in regards to teruma and outside of Eretz Yisrael. And in conclusion, the Gemara says the first enactment came from Yosef ben Yochanan, and they said if teruma touches soil that came from outside of Eretz Yisrael, it's required to be burned. The Chachamim of Shmona Shana, the 80 years prior to the destruction, they said, well, it doesn't need to be. Sorry, the Chachamim said it's in limbo. They added also, the Chacham of 80 years said that even the airspace is going to be in limbo. It's in a box that has an opening on the bottom, so there's nothing blocked. There's no barrier between the soil of outside of Eretz Yisrael and the teruma. The teruma also cannot be eaten anymore, but it doesn't get burned. The Chachamim of Usha, they enacted a surety that it's not only litlas, it's not just in limbo, but you actually burn teruma that touches soil, but they left airspace as is. That it's in limbo, you don't burn it, you don't need, but you don't need it. Kli zachuchas. What's the reason for the enactment on glass? The Gemara says, "Kli zachuchas my time ago Rabbana Tuma." Rabbi Yochanan Amar Shlakish, and Rabbi Yochanan Shlakish said, "Hoil v'tchilas b'riyasam anachot." Since the beginning of its creation comes from sand, and so it comes from the ground, and that's essentially the same as pottery. And therefore they compared it to kli cheres, and therefore it has tuma like a kli cheres. The Gemara says, well, it doesn't actually act like a kli cheres. It doesn't act like pottery. So why would there be a tahara, a purification process for glass in a mikvah? After all, if you treat it like earthenware doesn't go in. It doesn't have tahara, purification in a mikvah. It's required to be broken down. Alama Tanan, why did we learn in the Mishnah Kvayis? And this will count as a barrier in regards to mikvah, where we know that for a mikvah to work, it has to touch all the surfaces of the item or person in the mikvah at once. And if there's any barrier, any chatzitza, it will break the mikvah, the tahara will not work. So these would be barriers. Hazefes, tar of sort, v'hamor bekli zachuches, in glass. So in a glass, I don't know the translation of mor. Maybe our scroll said something.
I think more is myrrh, M-Y-R-R-H.
And what is that?
I mean, I think it is like some kind of a sap.
All right. So they bekliz chuches in a glass container. So we see that if you're dealing with the laws of chatzitza, we have to be talking about that it's going to a mikvah. And why would it go to a mikvah if it acts like an earthenware vessel? So earthenware vessels don't have a tahara mikvah. So the Gemara says we're talking about a case where it had a hole, and therefore it, as an earthenware vessel, it loses its status as a vessel because it has a hole in it. And then they filled it with a metal. You filled the hole with a metal. So now the question is, this vessel, earthenware vessel, that cannot function as a vessel because it's missing its base, has a hole in it, and you fill that base with metal. Does it now act as a metal vessel or earthenware vessel? What's the halacha? So Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir says that you always go with the maimed, whatever is main support. And therefore over here, since the main support of this glass vessel, meaning in its functionality as containing things, is the metal, so it has the halach of a metal. It could go to the mikvah. The Tanya, as we learned, a glass vessel that has a hole in it, broke, cracked, and you filled it with metal of lead in order to maintain its structure, and therefore it can act as a container. The halacha is, does it act like metal or does it act like glass, like earthenware? So Rav Shimon Gamliel says, Rameya says it is susceptible to tumah, and we don't say that it's not a vessel. Rather, since it is now, it has a metal container, the metal allows it to contain, so it acts in tumah. The Chachamim say no, it's a broken shard of earthenware. The fact that there's some lead in there to hold it together and act as a container, but still we still look at the main part, which is the shards, and the shards are broken vessels, and therefore it's not susceptible to tumah. It's not tummy. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, that that you consider it an earthenware vessel, glass is an earthenware vessel. Elamiata. Now we're on 16a Tazayinam and Aleph. Lo litamu migaban. So then, if it acts like earthenware, and the halacha is that earthenware vessels are only susceptible to tumah they're only susceptible to tumah on the inside. There's no tumah on the outside, even by touch. So it should not, glass should have the same. It should not be susceptible to tumah from the outside. And Lama Tanan, why did we learn kli cheres a kli neter tumasan shavet, earthenware vessel, and another earthenware type of vessel? It's a white clay. Either way, earthenware vessels, pottery, tumasan shavet, they have the same type of tumah. Mitamin umatamim avir, and they are only susceptible to tumah and only make other things tummy on the inside, but even if it doesn't touch, even just the airspace. Umitamim achareim, if they were inside something else from the outside, they can have tumah, meaning that on the bottom sides of the vessel, if the bottom side of the vessel has an indentation, that's also susceptible to tumah because it's considered a container on the outside. But the sides, meaning the outside of the clay pot, this is not going to be susceptible to tumah. And they all have the same rule that the way to make it tahor, once it had become tummy, is by breaking it. It is only earthenware vessels such as cheres and neter. They are susceptible to tumah on the inside and make things tummy on the inside, and it's uniform. But other things such as glass, they would not have that rule, and they would be susceptible to tumah even from the outside. So Gemara says you're right. When they enacted tumah for glass, they made it like earthenware in some things, but it's not completely like earthenware on account of, like metal that you can melt down and reshape, glass too. You can melt it down and reshape it. Since you can remake it, if it breaks, it cracks, you can fix it, as opposed to earthenware that you have to grind it down and restart. Therefore, it acts in certain things like metal. Well, if that's the case, that you melt it down and you restructure it, it becomes it's like metal, and therefore it has tumah on the outside. Well, let's take it one step further. Now, halacha for metal is if it contracted tumah, so you now have a metal vessel that's tummy, and you made a hole in it, and then you melt it down and you fix that hole. It goes back to the original tumah. We don't say that there's tumah. We don't say that there's tumah that leaves, like when you make a hole in an earthenware vessel. Earthenware vessel, since you have to grind it down to remake it, once you make a hole in it, it becomes a shard. It's no longer a vessel, and the tumah is gone. Whereas in regards to metal, once you reconstruct it, the tumah comes back. The Tanan, as we learned, And this is a Mishnah in Kalim, and we learned in Avodah Zarah. The Tanam we learned Kli Matchis Pshutein Umekablein Tamei. One of the stringencies in metal vessels is that it doesn't have to be a container. Even a flat piece of metal is also going to be susceptible to tumah. Pshute Kli Matchis. Pshute means it's flat. It doesn't have a receptacle. Nishbaru Taru. Once it's broken, it is tahor. However, chazav asang man kaleb. But if you restructured it and made a vessel out of it again, chazru l'tumas in yeshana. And the Gemara later is going to explain why. But the concept is that the original tumah comes back, and so therefore glass should have the same thing. But it's not so, right? Because we learned in regards to glass, to Tanam, we learned. And this is earlier in Maseches Kelim over there. Kli eitz ukli or kli etzem and kli zchukas. Wood vessels and leather canteens vessels. Kli etzem, bone vessels. And kli zchukas and glass vessels. Pshuteim, tar, and flat non-receptacle vessels have no susceptibility to tumah. Umekablean, if it has a receptacle, tamei, and that's when it becomes tamei. And the basis for the flat vessel not being susceptible to tumah, because they're all considered a part of wood, wood hides, wood and hide, which the Torah says that kli etzem chalbeged chol kli or says clothing and leather, and these are sackcloth, which have a receptacle, and therefore we learn from there also animal hides and horn, which is boneware, and ivory, etc., and glass. Later, the Gemara is going to talk about why glass, even though it's similar to metal, does not have tumah if it's not a receptacle. In any case, the Mishnah said a list of things that it doesn't have a susceptibility to tumah if it's not a receptacle, if it's a flat piece. So a sheet of glass, a window pane, is not susceptible to tumah just as a piece of glass. Tamein, once it has, even if it is a receptacle and it became tamei, nishbru taru. Once it's broken, once it breaks, it is no longer tamei. Chazav asam and kalim. If you remade vessels out of it, mikablin tuma mikan alaba, they were now again susceptible to tuma. They go back to their original state of being susceptible to tuma, but they themselves are not tamei. Mikan alaba in lemafreya, meaning that it's susceptible to tuma from here on, but not retroactively. The Gemara says, "Tumas kli zechuch is the Rabbana, Tuma Yeshana the Rabbana." Well, the reason is because we'll have a double rabbinic enactment. Glass is not included in the biblical Tuma, as we're saying now, that this was an enactment of Yosef ben Yezeh and Yosef ben Yochanan. Well, if it's an enactment of the Chachamim, then we're going to stick to a single enactment. And we have the Tuma Yeshana, the concept that metal, once you broke it down and reconstituted it into a vessel, it's going to go back and retain its original tuma. That's also a rabbinic enactment. Tuma yeshana darabanan, but tuma daraisa achisu barabanan tuma. So glass on a biblical level tuma, on a Torah level tuma, they said, you know what, we'll make tuma for it. But a rabbinic level tuma, which is an enactment of reconstituted metal having tuma darabanan leachitu rabbanan tuma. But for a rabbinic enactment, Chachamim did not constitute tumah. So this would be a double derabanan. One, that there is even a concept of tumah for glass. One, and two, and even when it's broken and you reconstitute it, there should be tumah again. That would be a double derabanan. So they didn't enact that, and therefore it remains a tumah only for glass as it is. And if it breaks, and if it becomes tumah, it breaks, the tumah leaves. And when you reconstitute it, restructure it, so you heat up the glass and you fix it, and you make a new vessel out of it, it'll be tummy from here on. if it becomes tummy, it's susceptible to contract tuma. But there is no tuma of retroactively for the original tuma. What was the question here? So the question is, why was there a tuma for a reconstituted tuma? We'll see all that. What's the reasoning for these enactments? So great. So we said the reason why we don't say reconstituted tuma, reconstituted glass brings back its old tuma, is because it's the Rabbanon in any case. And Tuma the Rabbanon, a double the Rabbanon we're not going to do. But at least the flat piece of glass should have Tuma. I don't know, we're ready at 8 o'clock, so we'll do that tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, as Hashem will see the reasoning of why a flat piece of glass, it's not a receptacle, also doesn't have Tuma, and all the other reasons of Tuma on that we were just talking about. Does anybody know if